The trick is to make sure that you're understanding the buyer's journey, you're working with them to help them make a buying decision, and they don't feel that they've been handed off from one person to the next to the next. And I think that's a very hard thing to achieve. So from a RevOps perspective, you're really supporting that architect, that whoever that is, whether it's a CRO or the head of sales, whatever their title is, you're really looking at this person who's architecting the entire flow.
How and why did you get into RevOps, and what really makes it tick for you?
Great question. So when it comes to ops, I kind of fell into it, right? So the earlier part of my career, I was a technical consultant at Accenture, working for like the media and entertainment studios. Then I went into sales thinking that this was going to be my path, and it's completely bombed. I actually worked in commercial real estate, actually did not learn, actually didn't earn commission for a good solid year. And so I had to earn money from a side hustle. A lot of people have side hustles these days, but back then it was like my only means to generating income. And so I learned how to deploy Sugar CRM, these open source software tools like Drupal and WordPress for small companies and nonprofits. That's how I earned my keep back then. And then I moved into recruiting, technical recruiting. So a lot of folks don't know this about me, but I was an agency recruiter for a number of years. And I recruited for technical roles, so systems administrators, network engineers, solutions architects, and a lot of what drove me to success there was really looking for shortcuts on the resume level that showed me, why would that person was a good candidate. And so I found out about all these technologies, and as I spent more time with folks who were in the space, I learned a lot about information systems just through osmosis. So I went to get my MBA, and I ended up in finance, thinking I was going to go on the CFO path. And so I wound up at Intel, where I worked in their internal venture capital group for my summer internship. And then I moved on to Google, where I supported the sales organization. And that's where I started back on the path of moving back into sales. Yeah. And so at Google, we had over 200 plus reps for the Google Enterprise group. It's now called G Suite. Before that, it was called Google for Work. And I learned about the art of building territories, driving SaaS unit economics, all of the things that are necessary for an ops role. So call it like a prerequisite course for me before jumping into the sales ops role. So I've now been in ops for a couple of years, and what drives me about it is really thinking about driving customer lifetime value, which then leads to revenue, and finding a way to build it out in a scalable and predictable fashion. So that combination of what we just talked about before the call, process enablement, advisory, and systems, that whole cocktail of disciplines mashed together.
Yeah, I think you actually raise a really interesting point of conversation here, Jeff, which is, where do revenue ops people go to get their training? Now, I'll explain this as a preamble. Like, sales ops seems more specifically defined, right? You can understand the pathway into sales ops. You can come from sales, sure, you can come from something like a finance, whatever, you can be an SDR. Revenue ops seems to encompass so many different aspects of the revenue function, obviously. I find it hard to understand how people can understand all these different aspects and do their job effectively. I mean, sure, you might come from finance, but how do you understand customer success? How do you understand marketing? So for you, Jeff, like, what's the key to success in understanding these different departments so you can be really awesome in the revenue ops role?
So I think first we have to define revenue operations to really understand what we're talking about. Revenue operations today in small companies is starting to view it as a consolidated operations functions that can span across 3 different go-to-market departments. So you're looking for this 5-tool player, jack of all trades, that can help support marketing ops, sales ops, CX ops. That's a hard ask, I think, because you're not going to find this unicorn candidate. A lot of us who came in RevOps came up through different ops backgrounds, whether it's MOPS or SOPs. Less so CX ops, but in the larger companies, you're looking at more of a PMO, more of a program management kind of office role, where they're supporting multiple stakeholders through project management, right? So that's very, it's a much different role. But either way, you're helping support the revenue architecture. Now, how I could speak for myself, how I came up, and maybe a few others as well. Um, I came from kind of an I-shaped background, right? So I came up from sales ops and then added a T on top where I have to pick up kind of the marketing ops and the customer success ops background to support my stakeholders. I learned sales ops first through like an apprenticeship, literally just moonlighting and learning it on my own, right? So I knew all the finance pieces, and I always argue that you start with coming from a technical background, your origin story, and then you layer on the acumen, or you're an SDR and salesperson moving into sales ops, so you have the acumen, but then you're layering on the technical pieces afterwards. So you can come from either path, and for me, I pick up marketing ops and success ops by having mentors. Second, binging as much content from experts in the field that as much as I can think about. I can't tell you how many podcasts I've consumed over the last 3 months. It's been riveting, really learning a lot about marketing and customer success. And then three, the technologies in my mind are the easiest part, right? But it's the business acumen, the concepts, and the process, and folks, how you think about customer success strategies, marketing execution, all of those different things. You won't learn overnight, but it helps to have mentors and find resources.
And that's interesting, this part for me as well, because you've mentioned all the different departments that revenue ops people sit in. And I was having a few conversations with people this week, and one of the main points of discussion was, should revenue ops sit inside of a sales team? Or is that in some way slightly like dangerous or questionable, and should it sit outside of sales? And I was just wondering where you lie on that debate, Jeff.
So I actually report into our marketing head over at Upkeep.
All right.
But let's just say I'll give you all the reporting structures that I've ever. So I rolled up to the SVP of sales over at a company called Patient Pop. So I've rolled up in the sales organization. Here I've reported into the SVP of marketing. And then at two other stints, I've reported to the CRO, right, who primarily held more influence and control over the sales organization. So 3 out of 4, I've aligned with the sales org. Now, there are folks who argue, and if folks have read funnel cakes literature for a separate organization, which is completely outside of both marketing, sales, and customer success. This would lead to a few benefits. So a RevOps organization that stands completely alone would act as a shared service across those 3 different departments, forcing kind of a prioritization and a critical path of all the projects that are out there. So rather than one overseeing function across with a dotted line management structure to folks who are embedded in each of the organizations. So you have ops and marketing, ops and sales, ops and customer success, reporting out to this, dotted line reporting out to an observer or an outsider. They would actually report directly to a RevOps person who stands completely alone, and they would allocate time as a shared resource. Now, I think personally that is an elegant structure, but it does require someone who can manage multiple stakeholders, align them, and make sure that you focus on developing a critical path.
Yeah, okay, this is really fascinating. So I mean, what does that say? You're talking about this elegant solution, and what does that say about the fundamental skills and understanding that someone in RevOps needs to have, do you think? And this could really help people who are trying to graduate from sales ops and sales ops team who are looking more towards a revenue ops mindset.
Well, I think it depends on which level you're at, right? So if you're an analyst or you're an SDR trying to break into the ops game, you need to layer. You probably come from a background with lots of acumen, right? So you know how to get a qualified meeting. You know what positioning your value is. You know the talk track, the qualitative side of sales, and so you need to now layer on kind of systems and how it fits into the overall picture. So you have to build an understanding of acumen, and then you have to know where the technology and the reporting fits. for a senior leader, you're going to be exposed to marketing ops, even if you're in sales ops, because quite frankly, the qualified pipeline is the end product that you receive from kind of marketing engagement, and now you're starting on sales execution. So that opportunity can be the starting point for many, but some even go further up, all the way up to a prospect, or Salesforce might call it a lead. And so what you can do is really pick up the acumen of the parts that you're missing from the funnel. So marketing, whether it's performance marketing or brand marketing, and all the different pieces that you would need to learn, field marketing. And then obviously you're going to have to align with more stakeholders than ever before. So sales ops is famous for being cat herders, and sales managers are famous for being cat herders. So you can almost say that sales ops folks are cat herders in many in many ways. And so alignment is going to be really important. So having the crucial conversations of bringing multiple stakeholders with competing priorities together sounds very familiar, like enterprise sales. Yeah. The second piece is having a program or a project management mindset. You operate in a world of a finite budget, finite time, and you're going to have to identify, what is priority 1 versus priority 3, and set it against a budget of time that you really have. And also add in flex. A lot of folks who are in ops can burn the midnight oil because they overcommitted to projects, and now you're up until 2-3 a.m. For 8 weeks straight. That yields a high burnout, in my opinion. So have professional boundaries around what projects you take on. The third part that I spoke about earlier is acumen. Having really incredible acumen that can allow you to shift between different audiences. You're shifting from marketing to sales to CS ops. It really gives you this miniature CRO in training almost.
Yeah, okay, so you brought up two. Yeah, really fantastic ones too. Now you raised two things specifically I wanted to ask you about. I definitely want to come back to the point of people in rev and sales ops tending to be involved in lots of different projects, which naturally leads to them being overworked sometimes. And I just like quite the human kind of perspective of that from you. But first of all, you said something earlier, which I wanted to talk about. You said that, in sales, you get the product of, the end of the marketing campaign, right? And you made a really interesting post yesterday, 23 hours ago to be exact, and that's about to quote, meteoric rise of inbound sales and whether or not that's killed the art of outbound. I just really wanted to give you some space to expand on that outside of the 700 character limit that we have on LinkedIn, and just to kind of crystallize what your thoughts were on that post and really what you're trying to get at.
That post is really, it came out from a debate or a thought process that has come about with some of the folks that I work with. And when I think about inbound sales, or the genesis of inbound sales in the first place, it's really a breakdown or a specialization, the dividing and conquering of a large role, right? If you play out what was sales in the past, sales had this huge responsibility all the way up to generating interest, maybe even awareness with some brand marketing air cover. And so what ends up happening is the salesperson is taking on too much. And so hence the rise of the SDR. You lop off the prospecting piece, keep the closing, the qualification and the closing to the sales rep. Now it's about generating, if they're not prospecting themselves, well, how do they have accounts? Well, you can give them a territory, you can give them a multitude of accounts that allows them to then have a territory prioritization exercise that they go through either on a quarterly or an annual basis. But now that they're not prospecting themselves, how do they bring in business? And that's where performance marketing, with the rise of digital technology. So now you can advertise on search or social. It's really retargeting and bringing in hopefully the right audience. And so leads are now arriving at the shores of a sales rep with much more interest than ever before. And so I always like to think of, when you have some assistance, you're not using that muscle. So over time, that muscle can degrade. Almost the same thing with the sales skill. So, that was really kind of like my Malthusian view of where outbound sales is going. because if inbound is going to continue growing, is it at the expense of outbound, which is almost a zero-sum view of the world, or is it, fuel to the fire and really growing the pie? A lot of the comments there on LinkedIn have been really great. I think it works at maybe the lower price points, as one of my former peers had mentioned in the comments that, enterprise sales, you still require outbound. The art of outbound is not dead. It's actually very much alive. I think it's a very fair point. You have these technical buyers who are doing the research, they're kicking the tires, doing the research, but they're not actually the folks who are committing and opening their wallets to purchase. They're not the decision maker. And so for an enterprise sale, inbound might have less of an effect, diminishing marginal returns, as opposed to at a smaller or mid-market, you can still attract those technical buyers who can lead you directly to the decision maker, or you're getting the DM themselves.
Yeah. This poses a really interesting question, right? Because right now, more or less, the structure is that you begin your world as an SDR, BDR, and you graduate into account executive. And the justification for that is because you learn so many of the core fundamentals of selling, like asking great questions, like qualifying, like getting an understanding for your prospect's worldview. Are we in danger, Jeff, with the growth of inbound, of those crucial sales skills depleting from the knowledge base of the sales community, do you think?
No, I don't think so. As I keep thinking about it, the job of a seller is really to help a buyer make a decision. And every buyer is at a different point of their kind of decision-making curve, right? One, I'm blissfully unaware that I don't have a problem. Two, I'm aware that I have a problem. That really comes in the form of, marketing, brand, content. Secondly, it's going to come with the outbound SDR. They're going to generate interest. Now, if they came to a point where they are aware, what are they going to do? They're going to start looking up solutions. They're going to start during their research phase. And so now they're looking at what are their options. I'm either going to do this myself, a build, or I'm going to go find a turnkey solution that either fits right in like a glove or has a few workarounds. But either way, I'm going to have to assess what my threshold for pain is and then figure out I need to get over this now. And so I still think there is some valuable skills that the inbound SDRs still go through, because not everyone sets up leads with a homogenous view of interest, right? So like, for example, there are certain businesses out there that take every lead as they come in. So if every lead's coming in, well, are they all at the same level? They're definitely at awareness, but they may not be that interested. They might just be, they're like me. I go to a store, I take a look around, and the first minute a retail associate bugs me, I'm going to be annoyed. I'm just looking. I'm really not serious about, what are you looking for today? Nothing. I was just browsing. So you probably get a lot of leads like that. But some businesses also do a really good job of not bubbling up leads as they come. They really try to find patterns in behavior that signal, hey, this lead is ready for a seller to talk to them. At that point, yeah, I do agree. Maybe some of the skills that an outbound seller, I think, could be in danger, because then they're already showing up. You don't have to drum up interest. At that point, you're qualifying, right? So instead of generating interest yourself, you're now just qualifying.
Yeah, interesting. And Jeff, I wonder, and please correct this if I'm wrong, but I wonder personally if this is particularly true for industries where there already is a collective knowledge or understanding of how this thing works. But what if you're in a piece of SaaS? What if you're in a tech space where you're driving like a genuinely very innovative solution, where actually the education piece on why your solution is necessary is still a piece of work that needs to be done? Do you think that affects this at all? Does that have any validity, do you think?
Well, inbound marketing is going to be a lot tougher for a software that is quote unquote category making, right?
Yeah.
So you have a solution for a problem that does not even have a label on it, right? There's no label such as CRM, sales engagement platform, SEP, revenue intelligence, Gong and Chorus, right? Those have labels to them now, but they did not have labels to them before. Folks would have different names for them, like dialects. You would say, oh, that's a call recording technology. Well, no, it's a sales coaching tool. So you have all these different ways to phrase things, and then overall the industry came up with a standard just to allow for a brand of the overall space. So for those companies that are breaking down barriers and aggregating disparate pieces across companies and coalescing it around in a new category, I think your approach should be very different, right? At that point, you're raising awareness and you're educating, and then you're hopefully bringing in customers who are advocates. And that's you're at this early adopter phase of the the product life cycle where you don't have the early majority. You're way early on. You're working with folks who are willing to take a risk, sight unseen, on your platform because they know they have a point. They're thought leaders in the space, and they recognize that you're coming in with a pain. It's not until later on that other prospects or customers realize, okay, there's a solution here, and I recognize it now, and I'm ready, right? So there are folks who are early to the party, so to speak.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And now I'm wondering, following on from what you've just said, how might the world of a revops person be different in that kind of company you've just explained compared to a company that's or a piece or a tech space that's already very well established? Like, do they have different tasks or priorities?
Well, in the category making, you're going to be primarily outbound, and on the marketing side, you're likely to develop tons of content, right? So in some ways, your stack might be simpler from a technology perspective. You're really just supporting outbound, and on the content side, you're really not driving a ton of like advertising traffic at that point. So it is simpler, but the work is still there. Outbound, it requires support around carefully looking at customer acquisition costs, really looking at the enablement piece, particularly as you're testing new messaging. If you were to be able to separate out from AEs to SDRs, that messaging piece is going to be really important. So doing a lot of A/B tests on your subject lines, testing out open and reply rates, modeling out what that would mean in terms of generating meetings. Generating meetings is going to be hard just because a lot of folks that you call, they're not going to get it. So instead of coming with kitschy, catchy marketing phrases, you may have to expand with leading questions, calibrating questions that get to a customer to say, yes, I am going through that. Yes, I am going through that. Wow, I didn't realize there was something for this. And then over time, that vernacular starts to become commoditized and marketable. Like, as I had mentioned, you have these categories.
Yeah, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Now, circling back to something you said previously, which is that the position you want to be in is where your marketing qualified leads are like really executable. They're really leads that sales are going to be able to sell to, and that requires alignment between sales and marketing. I was wondering, from your perspective, Jeff, how do revenue ops leaders reach a position where they have like quite a tight framework for marketing qualified leads that have a high percentage chance of closing to an SQO or something?
There's a couple of ways you can do it. There's the lead scoring methodology or lead grading. There are folks who look at two different components of scoring. So there's the behavioral, which is what actions are you taking on, and you simply assign some sort of point system, whether that's correct or not. You're gonna have to back test all of that. And then there's the demographic piece, is what signals do I have of the lead with no actions involved that tell me this person could, and that's going to be based on your ICP or customers that you've already successfully brought in. It gives your customers identity, a pattern to look for. So as those leads come in, you're using a combination, and it's all proprietary. Every company does it differently. Some get it right, some get it wrong, or some get it more right than others, and some get it more wrong than others. But that allows you to take a look at what the conversion rates are. So your key metric is going to be, what's the state of the prospect in state A, which is no meeting, and then state B, which is meeting, right? So how many of those leads will then convert into that next stage of kind of of the cycle, and that's going to be a meeting in some cases. like a demo request. There might be different flavors of what that meeting might mean. And so you know what your ultimate metric is. And so you're trying to look for signals before that will indicate this has a higher probability or percentage that will then convert over to kind of the next motion.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. Interesting. Now, what would be the actual process? What would be the day in work you go through to try and surface that evidence? What would that look like?
Everyone does it differently, but one process I like to run is a monthly MQL like congress or a meeting where we align sales and marketing together in a room, and we start to review what was our performance based on our current state of MQL definitions. So we'll go through performance and we'll go through the definitions that we've laid out. So if we have kind of job titles or industries or levels or geography, those are like basic 101 signals that we'll use. The second thing that we'll look at is for patterns of behavior. So folks who consume this level of content or in this sequence are going to have higher propensity to converting, right? So there might be someone who looked at 4 ebooks, showed up to 2 webinars, and if maybe that sequence of patterns is enough to show, okay, this person is really curious, a lot of academic type level of research, no signal that they want to come in, they haven't hit the contact us form or the demo page form, but maybe that's enough to get them over the line, right? Over a 2-month span. Or hey, we noticed that multiple prospects from the same organization in the same proximity location, that is a cluster of pattern that we should really consider, right? So there's some few things that you can do to come up with. One, develop some hypotheses, back test it, extrapolate forward, and experiment with kind of a new MQL definition that you roll out.
Yeah, okay. So let's imagine you roll out that new definition. When is it appropriate to start assessing the success of it?
Well, I'd always argue that you'd wait for a decent sample size, but in this example, the MQL meeting or committee would go on monthly, and so it wouldn't be the stale definition. It would be a very living and breathing definition where we align multiple stakeholders, we develop hypotheses, test them, and then we'll, by process of elimination, move out the bottom performing definitions.
Yeah, interesting. So you'd wait for a decent sample size. Find that interesting because some people I speak to say you should assess the success really from the very beginning. And I suppose one thing I've found it hard to understand is, how do you judge the success from the beginning? How do you even know what success looks like? So what would you say to someone arguing from that approach?
Well, I think you'd have to have a model, your operating model. So what would that mean? I know what my inputs are. So maybe my media spend, number of articles that we're going to release, the webinars we're going to produce, all the different touch points that allow for a customer to engage with us. From there, you're going to have an end product, which in this case might be qualified pipeline. And so how many leads are going to be touched and connected to? How many of those are going to lead to meetings? How many of those are going to lead to, say, a qualified opportunity that's going to be accepted by a sales team? So if you have that model, then you have some benchmarks to go after, which is at least your plan, right? Your target. And so you're going to have a number of different campaigns going on, and it's going to allow you to, one, take a look at a blend. So focusing on one specific MQL may not give you the end result. You may need to look at the aggregated body of work. And so as you're tweaking experiments, instead of going a whole hog and spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars on MQL, why don't you just test out with a small piece first instead of going upside down on your cost?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I like this. This has been really productive discussion, but I wanted to move it back to something we mentioned earlier, which is this tendency for revops, sales ops people to kind of be overworked, be involved in so many different projects, be working up until the early hours of the morning. I just wondered, like, your philosophical approach to this, really. It doesn't really have to be resulting in any kind of procedural understanding, but you as a human being, how do you respond to this?
I always think that healthy employees make great employees.
Mm,
So if your team is working till late in the evening on a regular basis, I think something's fundamentally wrong.
mm,
Now, if they're working late in short bursts or they find something that they really enjoy, it's a passion project,
mm,
then by all means, right? I'm not going to stop you, but I'm going to
mm,
encourage you to sleep and
mm,
come to work fresh. Fresh minds lead to fresh work, right? Fresh productivity. So as a leader, I try to understand where's my team's capacity,
mm,
and then understanding what projects can we as an organization take on. So
yeah,
when I'm going through kind of strategic projects with my stakeholders, it's about, okay, what's top of mind for you? Okay, how does that fit in the pantheon of projects that we have, and how important is that? So we'll have calibration sessions with each of these different leaders.
mm,
It allows them to see eye to eye. Okay, the ops organization is running full speed or at half speed, and they have capacity. Let's give them more projects. It's my responsibility to negotiate and work with my stakeholders to realistically size up the projects, determine what we can take on, and then at a personal level, doing the same thing. So each of my team members, I've always asked them, how are you spending your time? Where do you think you have more time to give? If you were to remove this project off your plate, what would that look like?
mm,
And that allows me to take a look at um, how much could I layer on or assign to them. Um, and then I'll ask them, do you want to take on a stretch assignment? If this is a stretch assignment, here's what it really means. You're going into a project where you're going to grow from it because it's quite simply,
mm,
by definition, a stretch project. And so I try to keep that in mind. One, a personal development plan for each employee. Where do you want to go in your career? What skills do you have now that you're strong at? What are you missing? How can I, keep you top of mind as you keep progressing your career, giving you really interesting work? And then secondly, making sure that you don't burn out. So
yeah.
I think there are times when folks take on stretch projects. There's an understanding that, yeah, you're probably going to take a little longer than usual. You might put in a few extra hours here and there. Um, but it's really just hopefully a frank conversation with my team.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's interesting because when you talk about that alignment piece with your stakeholders, I'd imagine much of the time you have to say no. Now, when I speak to other revenue ops people, they're kind of in this position where they feel like they're having to say yes very often. Sometimes they don't feel like particularly valued in the organization, or they don't feel particularly secure in the organization, and they feel that because of this there's like an inadequacy where they have to say yes and complete every project. So how do you get to the place, Jeff, where you can say no to other stakeholders?
So I think saying no is an important skill, but I think another way to frame it is saying yes, but,
Mm,
right? So if you reframe no to a yes, but
mm,
you're changing the conversation to one of trade-offs.
mm,
And so, IT organizations and product teams, they're really great at this, right? You
mm,
can almost argue they probably build the best roadmaps in the company. And
mm,
there's a playbook there for RevOps leaders to take a look at. Yeah, I would almost argue for any RevOps person to talk to their head of product and say, I'd love to take a look at your roadmap
mm,
and take a page right out of that playbook. That help you prioritize kind of the litany of projects that are out there from a strategic perspective. Then you have your tactical work that you always have to get through, right? The stuff that's
mm,
on a regular cadence. But if you have that in mind, you can then go through a very similar process. Not every feature gets on the roadmap. Otherwise, you'll end up with this Rube Goldberg machine, overly complex machine for a simple task.
yeah.
Same thing with an ops organization. You're going to have to get to a point where you can take on a request and then size it up. And that's where I think prioritization really helps. Now, if you have a great conversation and rapport and understanding with your partners, everyone's going to view their project as a priority one. But once they get a view of the overall business, they might say, you know what, my project is important, but it isn't as important as these two or three on your list. Now,
Mm,
you can be creative and say, look, we can accommodate more projects if we, one, um, augment the capacity of the team in some fashion, whether that's getting a consultancy, a third party, or bringing on another headcount. Um, those are things that you can negotiate. Almost everything is negotiable, but there are trade-offs.
Mm.
And I think the fundamental exercise is not to say no, but to look at it in terms of yes, but. And I think that's going to be a more powerful combination of skills to be a partner.
Mm. Yeah, and that it sounds like, when you do that, you have much better business alignment, right? Because what you've described there, where people can understand the priorities of different stakeholders and the business as a whole, it sounds like that alignment piece is really crucial.
I think it also makes you human, right? If you say no, you
Yeah.
become this cyborg that just says no all the time, and you almost become you can be viewed as uncooperative.
Mm.
But that's not
Mm.
that's not necessarily the case. You are cooperative. It's just that you're trying to keep priorities, time, and the quality of product in mind.
Yeah, do you know this, Jeff? For this actually raises a really interesting question for me. And it's something I've been trying to understand through speaking with people. And it's kind of like, what function does revenue ops play in a business and where does it sit? Now, I was speaking to someone literally just before you. And I suppose the context here is that it's a smaller company, it's a younger company, it's the first RevOps person in the company. And that very much sits in the sales team, and it very much acts as a facilitator for the sales team. Now, other people have a view that you're more of a strategic driver, and other people have a kind of thing that you're pulling together different revenue teams. So you're like this really important emissary for different stakeholders. And I wondered, from your perspective, Jeff, like, where does RevOps sit in the business, and what fundamental role does it play in the company as well?
Well, let's say they have a CRO. I personally believe they should report to CRO, the right hand of that organization, right? Um, by definition, the revenue officer would oversee all the handoffs from marketing, the sales, the CS, that customer journey should hopefully be seamless, right? It should feel from a
Mm.
customer's perspective that they're not being, when you're on a phone, you call a customer service agent, then they bring in another agent, and you feel like you've just been handed off to someone else. Um, the trick is to make sure that you're understanding the buyer's journey, you're working with them to help them make a buying decision, and they don't feel that they've been handed off from one person to the next to the next. And I think that's a very hard thing to achieve. So from a RevOps perspective, you're really supporting that architect, that whoever that is, whether it's a CRO or the head of sales, whatever their title is, you're really looking at this person who's architecting the entire flow. That's where I believe that the RevOps should sit.
Mm. Yeah, okay, I like that a lot. Okay, so one question I always like to ask people is, if you were in a room full of RevOps leaders, let's imagine like the absolute best in history, like the best thought leaders you'd really aspire to be one day. Not that you're not already, but this is imaginary, I suppose. What would you ask these people?
One, where do you see our profession going?
Mm.
Two, um, what are the kind of opportunities driving RevOps today? And three, how do we find more talent to help, fill our ranks and drive the profession, right? That would be the top
Mm.
three. Then the fourth is, what are you doing to partner and work with your go-to-market stakeholders? There's marketing, sales leaders, customer success leaders. What are you doing today to help drive alignment? Like, what do those conversations look like? So those would be the four things. And I think there's one question that has an asterisk around it, which I think is, where do folks go from RevOps? What's the next step after that? Is it
Yeah.
a COO role where you're running operations across the business? Is it
Mm.
a revenue strategist type role, title to be undefined, maybe even a CRO? What does that look like? How many VP of RevOps are out there? I'd argue there aren't. Not every company has RevOps. let alone a VP title around it. So, that's another question that I think opens up another can of worms.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, you're right. I mean, I prospect and I look at, RevOps people, all day. It's what I do. And you don't see many VP of RevOps. And so I'm wondering, what do you think that says to how well the profession is understood and respected? Or does it say anything about that at all? Or am I kind of asking a nonsense question?
I think it's a real question. I mean, you can kind of measure it, right? Just based on your search, you can see there are a few, and if it can be measured, then it can be optimized in some ways, right? So when it comes to these job titles, RevOps, the capabilities, the responsibilities, they exist in the organization. They might sit in different pieces. It's one of the main reasons why sales ops was created in the first place.
Yeah.
And so with
Yeah.
RevOps, certain industries, maybe they're leading, they're early adopters. Maybe they recognize a trend, and that's why they're calling it RevOps, and they're putting them, they're focusing on alignment across these different go-to-market organizations. So companies might call it RevOps. Some companies might not. You might talk to sales ops leaders, and you peek under the hood, and you realize, wow, you really are doing the work of RevOps. You're supporting the marketing team and you're supporting the sales team. You just don't have the words around your job title that indicate you're a RevOps, right? So I think that's one thing is, the standardization of language is not there. Second, there might be industries who, call it something different. Maybe they have all the responsibilities decentralized. Large companies, I can tell you, RevOps isn't the jack of all trades definition that I'm giving. It's highly specialized. Like, for example, when I was at Google, I was in sales finance. I did territories and quotas and comp plans. Didn't touch, a lot of the other pieces of operations until much later. Until I took on a role at a smaller company where I had to wear multiple hats. So the idea of revenue operations is, I think, still very fluid. I think the smoke needs to clear out a little bit over the next coming quarters and years. But I see the perception and the arguments around it are quite lively. I think you're likely to see RevOps as a job function grow. I think you're likely to see the technologies try to match the coming sea change. So, for example, how do we merge these MarTech and sales tech stacks together? Today the solution is integration, but what if the solution wasn't integration? It was actually feature. You're actually putting it into one platform.